Update, brought to you by Simcox Advocates, advising businesses and families since 1949. Visit simcox.com or call 690 300. Manx Radio's Update with Andy Wint.
First of May, good evening. It's 5:30. This is Update for Monday, 11th of September 2023 from Manx Radio. 30 minutes to look at the latest news on the Isle of Man, and background to that news with sport and business and Sea-Watch travel updates and the newsmakers in person this evening. Tim Crookall MHK is back at infrastructure, how to cut the NHS waiting list for dentists. Children in care should stay in the system longer. The problem of evidence presented late, and 4 games without a win. Ravens must keep believing, says the boss.
Man Benham for all your business and legal needs.
First of all, at 29 minutes ahead of 6 o'clock, the Update News headlines. First to my Chanel Suku.
First to my Tim Crookall is set to return to his role as Infrastructure Minister. He is replacing his replacement, Chris Thomas, who was sacked in July. In just over 2 days, members of the Royal College of Nursing are expected to take strike action as part of their ongoing dispute with Manx Care over pay and conditions. On the 14th of September, the health body will be running a Christmas Day schedule for most services, but the emergency department, amongst others, will operate as normal. And the amount of money Manx Utilities customers owe on their electricity bills has more than tripled over the last 3 years. Figures released by the authority show there were almost £3.4 million in unpaid electricity bills in July. In international news, police have confirmed that 5 children who travelled from the UK to Pakistan with Sarah Sharif's father have all been found at her grandfather's home in the city of Jhelum. After a parliamentary researcher was arrested on suspicion of spying for China, the Prime Minister's insisted the UK will defend its democracy. And North Korean leader Kim Jong-un appears to have set off for Russia, where he's expected to meet President Putin for talks in the coming days. Mr. Kim, who hasn't left the country in 4 years, is thought to be travelling on his private train. Those were your headlines. News at 6.
Man Benham. Contact us by phone, video call, email or face-to-face. We're happy to connect with you. Manx Radio Weather with Manx Glass and Glazing.
Goromayed, thank you. Chanel from the Ronaldsway Met Office. It was all going so well, but now, well, there's no wind warning in operation for the North Irish Sea. State of sea is slight. The drizzly rain will clear tonight in a light to moderate northwesterly, which will turn moderate to fresh later. Some clear spells overnight, minimum 13 degrees. And for Jammu, dry on Tuesday with sunny spells, a moderate to fresh northwesterly. Highest temperature 17, down to 12 through the night. Into Jakrain, dry with sunny spells on Wednesday, light to moderate southeasterly through the morning. It'll turn cloudy after lunch on Wednesday, top temperature 17, and then it'll be a wet evening on Wednesday. Sunset tonight, 14 minutes to 8, high tides at 24 minutes to 11. Low water tomorrow morning, 20 past 5. Sunrise quarter to 7. And the morning high tide at 9 minutes past 11.
Manx Glass and Glazing can supply and install single, double and triple glazing. Call 674 573 or visit the showroom on the Snugborough Trading Estate.
Tim Crookall is returning to his role as Infrastructure Minister. The Glenfaber and Peel MHK was moved from the role to Enterprise Minister last summer before resigning just a month later. So he's replacing his replacement, Chris Thomas MHK, who was sacked in July.
There's always a job to do, and if you're asked to do it, you have to have a good reason not to do it. And the Chief Minister has asked me if I would reconsider going back to the Department of Infrastructure. And I've been thinking about it for a couple of weeks since we had our first conversation, and the answer is yes.
What is it that you want to achieve within infrastructure that you didn't feel like you could do during your initial tenure there?
Well, it's not what I couldn't do in my first tenure there, because we were starting to do it, but I was asked to move to DFE. But it's a case of going back there now, hopefully, and picking up from where we left off and seeing, as you know, there's reports being done at the moment about DOI, what they do and what they shouldn't be doing maybe, picking up that report and working with the staff and making the most of it.
Well, you mentioned the report there. Is it a fair question to ask whether or not you're just going to be a placeholder as an infrastructure minister in this form as we currently know it?
All I know is that there will be some changes, but what they are and what the report says, I don't know. I haven't seen it yet, so we'll see in the future. There does need to be some changes down there, and the staff have said that for years, and previous ministers have said that for years. It became a dumping ground years ago for all sorts of things. So, hopefully the reporters, the people doing the report have had a good look at what goes on down there and what needs to be there and what doesn't need to be there, and then we'll try and make those changes as soon as possible.
How can people be sure that you're going to be reliable in the role of infrastructure? Because there has been a lot of shuffling so far in this administration that's only been going for 2 years now.
Well, the reason I came out, as I said just now, of infrastructure to start with was because there was a space elsewhere, and the only way the Chief Minister saw at the time of filling that space was asking me to move to DFE and bringing in Mr Thomas. Things have changed again since then, and in the meantime I've been outside of the Council of Ministers, but the Chief has seen fit to ask me to go back, so I'm more than happy to go back. As I say, there's a job to do, and he's asked me.
Restricting access to NHS dentists could be seriously problematic, according to Health Minister Laurie Hooper MHK, as despite Manx Care's top executives discussing ways to tackle growing number of residents on waiting lists, one of which considered changing eligibility requirements.
The situation on the island with respect to NHS dentistry is not acceptable. If you have a look at some of the response to the recent oral health strategy debate in Tynwald, it's quite evident that something needs to be done. Ultimately, though, what this really does require at its absolute core is simply more funding. The reality is the way that we commission NHS dental services on the island is we set out a number of units that we buy, and we essentially buy it from the private sector. That's the way that dentistry has always worked, as far as I'm aware. That's definitely the way it currently works. So ultimately, if we want more service delivery, we need better contracts, we need new contracts, but ultimately we are going to need some additional funding. And it's the point I tried to get across to Tynwald when we had that debate around the children's oral health and the oral health strategy a couple of months ago, was that Tynwald is jumping up and down asking us to do things, but then ultimately they're not providing us with the necessary funding to go away and deliver on the things we're being asked to do. We are working with Manx Care, looking at our charging framework. So in the same way that we're looking at things like prescription charges, we'll be looking at exactly the same things in terms of dentistry. I think restricting access, would be seriously problematic, and it's not something that I think is being talked about at the moment. The whole issue itself is potentially more complex, but ultimately the core of the problem is we only ask them and we only pay them to deliver a certain amount of units of activity. If we want them to do more, if we want more access to NHS dentistry, the way the current system is modelled, the way the current system works, we have to buy more units from the private sector.
You're listening to the Isle of Man's quintessential daily news and current affairs roundup. Update on Manx Radio.
A woman who conned the public into donating money to an equine company she claimed was a charity has been jailed. Here's Amy Griffiths.
Wendy Elizabeth Megson, who's been in custody since her trial, had never registered Manx Equitherapy Limited, MEL, as a charity, but sought donations from individuals and companies. The 62-year-old fraudulently used other charities' registration numbers to obtain funding and failed to file annual accounts between 2013 and 2019. She was found guilty after a trial of 2 Charity Act offences and 2 of deception. Jurors also convicted her of 9 counts of benefit fraud. Between 2017 and 2021, Megson was overpaid more than £31,000 in benefits after claiming she couldn't work. The claim was fraudulent from the outset. During sentencing at Douglas Courthouse, which Megson refused to attend, the court heard she'd solicited money for MEL, including £1,000 from a charitable initiative run by Tesco. The bank account where donations were held was used as her personal piggy bank, the prosecutor said, to fund a lavish lifestyle, which included shopping sprees, off-island trips and hotel stays. Sentencing Megson as she was in the courtroom, Deemster Graham Cook was told the hearing marked the 24th in this case. Describing her actions as planned exploitation of the public, he sent her to prison for 39 months, telling her it's time for sentence to be imposed upon you. Megson was previously jailed in August last year for 20 weeks after being found guilty of animal cruelty offences after a trial which also took place in her absence.
The Ravens need to keep believing and find consistent consistency after 4 games without a win, so says manager Paul Jones after a frustrating 2-0 home defeat on Saturday. But he's confident FC Isle of Man can turn it around.
We just need to find a little bit of consistency in our performance levels and maybe a bit of consistency in personnel. You know, I've strategically chosen to use a number of players over the last kind of month in order to get us through a really busy August and a 6 away game period without too many injuries and without too many people being really fatigued and struggling, which has tended to happen. So, you know, maybe we do need to get some consistency to what we're doing on the pitch, and that will help build partnerships and you know, help to create more consistent levels of performance. And you know, it's down to the players really to make sure that they're putting their hands up and they're the person that are in the shirt. So it's going to be really tricky still in September, Saturday, Tuesdays, all the way through September into early October. So, you know, as much as I would crave consistency, it depends on player availability, it depends on lots of different factors that are sometimes beyond my control when I'm trying to pick a team. So we'll just have to roll with the punches a little bit, and then, you know, once we get to Saturday sort of games, life becomes a little bit easier for us. But there's more than enough in this squad. I think we've got a really strong, deep squad, and you know, I trust all the players that we give the opportunity to start a game. And you know, I think it's on them really as individuals and a group to really kind of get to the levels and the standards on a consistent basis that's required. And you know, we're doing all we can as a coaching staff, and you know, then it's over to the rest of us to get those performance standards. So you know, it's there. It's like it's so close. It's so close, and we just got to keep being consistent with our messaging and what we're doing, and it'll come.
Sea Watch with the Isle of Man Steam Packet Company.
The motor vessel Manxman departed Heysham at 5 to 3. She'll be into Douglas well gone 6 o'clock, onto the Linkspan about 6:30. It's thick mist at the moment in the bay, can't see anything. This evening's departures at 8:15. Ben McCree heads to Heysham, getting there at about midnight. Overnight departure 2:15, back at 6 tomorrow morning. The high-speed craft Manannan departed Douglas at 16 minutes to 5 o'clock. She'll be in Liverpool at about 8 o'clock, 8:15ish, departing Liverpool at 8:45 if possible, arriving back to Douglas just gone midnight. Tomorrow morning's departure, the Manxman departs Douglas at 8:45, heading to Heysham.
Follow the Steam Packet on Twitter for the latest sailing information.
Children in care on the Isle of Man should stay within the care system for longer, according to the island's children's champion. Kerry Sharp MLC believes the age teenagers can move into semi-independent living needs to be increased.
They can be as young as 16, which means that in order to prepare to move on, they have to start preparing when they're 15 to move on. And that's really young for anyone. I mean, I think if any of us look at our children, we think 15. Okay, so if you're 15, in a year's time, you're going to be signing on for benefits, paying for your own food, your own toiletries, your own clothing. That is really young. It's too young. One of my recommendations is that children should be able to stay in care until their early 20s, and also that when they do leave care, aftercare support should be provided way into their 20s, because a lot of these children are not as emotionally secure as their peers just because they've lived without their parents for whatever reason for so long. In Scotland, for example, the age for leaving care is 21, and I believe it's been 21 since 2015. And aftercare in Scotland certainly lasts until a young adult is 26, which I think is a lot more realistic. Because if we can give our young people who are leaving care the very best support early on, then they stand a far better chance in the future, because we know from a lot of reports that have come out that children leaving care have lower outcomes overall than their peers.
Manx Radio Business Briefing.
At 16 minutes before 6, UK pharma giant GSK has announced that Japanese regulators are reviewing its proposed new momelotinib treatment for people with myofibrosis, the type of blood cancer. Momelotinib is currently not approved in any market. It's hoped to address the significant medical needs of myofibrosis patients, especially those with anemia. The new drug application application, the NDA, which includes data from clinical trials addressing key clinical manifestations of myelofibrosis, has been accepted for review by Japan's Ministry of Health, Labour and Welfare. And for a full daily market report, go to ramseycrookall.com. Airbnb's had to stop accepting some reservations in New York City as new regulations on short-term rentals mean big changes for travellers hoping to avoid the cost of a hotel in the Big Apple. New rules aim to end a free-for-all in which landlords and residents have been renting apartments by the week or night to tourists or others for short stays. Now, rentals shorter than 30 days are only allowed if hosts register with the city and are physically present in the home for the duration of the rental, sharing living quarters with no more than 2 guests at a time regardless of the size of the space. So families are effectively barred. Airbnb, VRBO and others aren't allowed to process rentals for unregistered hosts, and few have successfully registered under New York Local Law 18. Officials and housing advocates who'd pushed for the restrictions said it's necessary to stop apartments from becoming de facto hotels. Booking platforms and hosts will get fined for all violations. Other metro areas are watching this situation like a hawk to see if it harms tourism, and if it doesn't, it could turn into a blueprint for other cities looking to reduce short-term rentals.
The Stock Market Report, brought to you by Ramsey Crookall.
UK and European stock markets closed higher. The yen jumped as comments from Bank of Japan Governor stoked hopes that Japan could soon herald a new era away from negative rates. Oil was little changed after fresh Saudi and Russian crude output cuts, and gold rose. And the numbers now from Ramsey Crookall reporting at the close in London. The FTSE 100 up 0.3% at 7,498. The DAX in Frankfurt up just over 0.4% at 15,809. A short time ago in New York City, the Dow Jones Industrials up almost 0.1% at 34,607. The Nasdaq Tech Stocks Index up 0.7% at 13,855. And in the Midwest, the S&P 500 up 0.4% at 4,473. In the exchange markets, the British pound sterling trading at $1 25.2 cents, €1 16.6 cents, and 23 South African rand 65.6 cents. In commodities, gold's up 0.5% at $1,926 per troy ounce, and a barrel of Brent crude up 0.8% at $90.45.
You've got an investment plan?
Yeah, Mike set it up.
But don't you need loads of money to do that?
Not this one. It's called Shearwater from Ramsey Crookall, and you pay in monthly as little as £100. So it's like saving regularly, really helping us invest in the future for a house, or the kids' education.
£100 a month? I could easily do that.
You should. The sooner you start, the better.
Invest in your future with as little as £100 a month. Shearwater from Ramsey Crookall, the island's investment specialist for 75 years. Call 717171 or visit ramseycrookall.com. Licensed and regulated by the Isle of Man Financial Services Authority.
Efforts are underway to try and stop court cases from being delayed due to evidence not being provided on time. With that story, Tessa Hawley.
The Isle of Man Constabulary says the demands on its digital evidence team are only growing, and it's now looking at ways to try and grow the workforce within its budgetary constraints. Concerns have been raised in recent summary court hearings at Douglas Courthouse that CCTV and body-worn footage isn't always being produced to the Attorney General's chambers on time. This leads to delays passing it on to advocates, which results in them requesting adjournments for their clients. One prosecutor told the court the digital evidence unit is clearly swamped. In response, the Isle of Man Constabulary told Manx Radio, in the current age of policing, most investigations have an element of digital evidence. The processes to provide this evidence to the court requires highly skilled and trained digital evidence staff who are a relatively small team within the constabulary. Whilst they work extremely hard, the demands are only growing. As such, on occasions there have been delays in being able to provide this evidence to the court in the time frame requested. The constabulary adds it's looking at ways to try and grow this team, which it says is difficult within its budgetary constraints. In the meantime, however, the constabulary adds it's continuing to work with the Attorney Generals, the courts and defence advocates to use technology that enables them to have access to this evidence in a quicker time frame that will enable the courts to administer justice in a timely fashion.
Update brought to you by Simcox Advocates, advising businesses and families since 1949. Visit simcox.com or call 690 300. Manx Radio Sport.
Fast to my Darren Timson.
In football, Laxey continued their winning start in the 2023-24 Canada Live Premier League as they beat Union Mills 5-4 in an enthralling game at Glen Road on Saturday, which saw Jordan Cooper scoring a brace for the home side. In hockey, the new season for the Mixed Premier League kicked off at the weekend, and defending champions Backers A stamped on an early marker as they secured a very convincing win over newly promoted Harlequins A with a 9-1 victory. In cycling, Manx riders Matthew Bostock and Max Walker concluded their 2023 Tour of Britain on Sunday. Bostock of Bolton Equities Blackspoke finished 61st in the general classification. However, the Manxman was able to secure 2 top 20 finishes in the H-stage event. But unfortunately for the New Zealand team, they finished last, standing in 15th place. Meanwhile for Walker, the Manxman wasn't able to break the top 40 in any race, totaling 50th in the general classification. But Walker's team Trinity Racing will be happy as they concluded their tour, finishing 6th in the team standings. In golf, Anna Dawson competed in the Big Green Egg Open at the Hilversumse Golf Club in the Netherlands over the weekend. Dawson made it to the final day of the Open, where she was able to compete against the likes of 3-time major winner Anna Nordqvist. But although the Manx golfer was able to beat the 2 cut-off days, she finished in 64th with a score of 5 over par. Finally, there was some good news for Caitlin Adshed at the weekend. The teenager was part of the Team GB team which won gold at the Trials of Nations in France. The Islander, along with Alice Minter and 9-time world champion Emma Bristow, finished in first place in the Motorcycle Trials World Championship event, topping the standings ahead of Spain and Norway.
Manx Radio Travel, driven by Quayside Tyres and Service Centre.
Inbound at Ronald's Way, the 10 to 6 Loganair from Manchester is expected on time. The 10 to 8 o'clock Loganair from London City on time. 20 past 8 Loganair from Liverpool on time, the returning patient transfer plane. And the 25 to 9 Gatwick EasyJet is reported on time. Outbound, the 5 o'clock EasyJet to Bristol was delayed till about now, should be offline now. And the 5:30 EasyJet to Liverpool leaving about now. Then it's the 6:25 Loganair to Liverpool on time, and the 9:05 return to Gatwick showing on time. Newcastle Town Roads closed to traffic between Spring Valley Roundabout and the bottom of Richmond Hill for resurfacing. Should be on for the next seven weeks. The junction at the bottom of Richmond Hill has been reopened and traffic diverted along the Energy from Waste Plant Access Road and the top of Quegg Hill. Temporary lights on Upper Promenade in Port Erin for resurfacing. Temporary lights between Ballacrane and Balig Bridge in St John's. And temporary lights through on the main road through Kirkmichael for work on the road surface. Some lights too on West Quay Ramsey for work on the harbour wall, and lights too on Richmond Road Ramsey for pavement work. Ballagorn Road's closed for ditching works near Ballabeg. You got temporary lights on Victoria Road in Douglas at the Falconcliffe Terrace junction for water main work. Falconcliffe Terrace also closed for that work. Hillside Avenue is closed for an adjacent office window replacement in Douglas. Mona Drive closed in Douglas between Empire Drive and Victoria Road for sewer lining works. And that work on Ballabruey Drive gets underway from this Wednesday, the 13th.
H&Hmotorcycles.im for all your motorcycle requirements. Southgate Industrial Estate, opposite Quayside Tyres. Call 665646.
A minute's silence was held at the weekend on the start line of the San Marino Motorcycle Grand Prix as the MotoGP paddock paid its respect to Isle of Man resident Mike Trimby. The 74-year-old passed away on Friday. Here's Dave Moore.
Mike Trimby rode at the Manx Grand Prix in 1972 and competed at the TT for the next 2 years. By the time he and his wife Irene made the Isle of Man their home at the turn of the century, he'd already founded and was chief executive of IRTA, the body which represented the teams in motorcycle Grand Prix racing, and part of a powerful quartet which controls the sport, along with commercial rights holder Dorna, the governing body, the FIM, and the MSMA, which is dominated by the Japanese manufacturers. He helped improve safety, better prize money for riders who were constantly on the verge of striking when they had to queue up the end of events for their winnings. He was also instrumental in increasing TV coverage, amongst other things. In 1991, with the series seemingly in disarray, Mike worked alongside Bernie Eccleston, who went on to sell the commercial rights to Dorna so they could retain the television coverage, while Urta ran the championship. This was the rebirth of the World Championship, which we now know as MotoGP. Earlier this year, at the age of 74, Mike told Manx Radio of his desire to keep working.
I hope it's not my last year. I do take it 1 year at a time. I'm only here as long as the teams want me to carry on, but they seem happy with what I'm doing at the moment. So as long as I'm reasonably healthy.
And when there was no racing, Mike and wife Irene loved to return to their home in Sulby.
And we love the Isle of Man. I only moved there 22 years ago, as you know, but we love living there. It's just a wonderful place. No crime, no traffic. It's brilliant.
Update brought to you by Simcox Advocates.
5 to 6 this Monday evening. The amount of money Manx Utilities customers owe on their electricity bills more than tripled over the last 3 years. Figures released by the MUA show that the authority says there were almost £3.4 million in unpaid electricity bills in July, up from just £950,000 in 2019. Here's Sean Cowper.
In response to a Freedom of Information request submitted by Manx Radio, Manx Utilities has revealed the total value of debtors' balances stood at £4,873,794 in July, with more than two-thirds of that debt made up by electricity customers, as well as £3,356,730 in electricity debt. July's figures also showed more than £17,000 in sewerage debt, more than £340,000 in water debt and £1.16 million in other debt. Electricity debt has continued to rise each year since the end of the 2018 to 2019 financial year, but overall debt peaked in March 2022 when a total of £9.2 million was owed to Manx Utilities. July's overall figure is also the lowest this year, dropping from almost £7.3 million in June. The amount of rates debt owed to Treasury by Manx Utilities customers has also been climbing. In March 2019, £184,033 of sewerage rates and almost £970,000 in water rates were owed, but in March this year those figures had risen to almost £960,000 for sewerage and £1.48 million for water. Meanwhile, the total number of customers in arrears has risen by more than 1,000 since March last year. The end of the 2021 to 22 financial period saw 1,424 customers owing money to Manx Utilities, but as of July that figure stood at 2,488. Manx Utilities says it does offer support to customers, including managing payment plans and using flexible ways to pay.
That's it for Update tonight, compiled from the resources of Manx Radio's news department. Thanks to newsreader Chanel Suku, producer Beth Espy. Stick around, Phil Gaun's here with Agenda After 6. The greatest hits with Chris Kinley at 6:30, and I'll be back tomorrow.
WINT